I am WordPress Accessibility Day 2023, and I am very excited to have with me today Dan Summer from Empire Captions. Empire Captions Solutions is one of our gold sponsors for this year's event, which we very much appreciate. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Empire Captions Solutions?
Sure. Thanks, Amber. I'm Dan Summer. I'm the COO of Empire Captions Solutions, and my business partners are out in San Diego. I'm in North Carolina, and we focus on post-production captions, offline captioning, video accessibility, and we started off with post-production captions in around 2019. And we got very into video accessibility and expanded into things like audio description, ASL interpretation for videos. And then more of our clients started wanting real-time services, which is actually how both me and my business partner, Diana Lerner, got involved in accessibility. Me being a type-well transcriber, she's also one. So we started providing real-time service again, trying to provide more comprehensive solutions to our clients and making videos and events more accessible and trying to bridge that gap between real-time events and the post-production accessibility. So glad to be here and really glad to be sponsoring the post-production captions for WordPress Accessibility Day and be back this year.
Yeah, and I did throw up for anyone who can't see, if they want to learn more about you, your website, of course, is empirecaptions with an S on the end.com. And we are, of course, very happy to have you here today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about video accessibility and event accessibility, because live events are so prominent these days, but I feel like there's still so many live events that don't quite get accessibility right. So I'm hoping that in this conversation, we can provide some helpful tips. And as you mentioned, you were in addition to being a sponsor, you are the vendor that we used last year, and we came back to you all because we had such a great experience with Empower Caption Solutions for the live captions, the sign language interpretation, and post-event transcription. So I'm curious, could you share a little bit about since you're a returning person with the event, what you love about the event and why you were interested in sponsoring this year?
Yeah, to be honest, I'd never really seen an event that was dedicated to WordPress accessibility like this before. Definitely nothing of that size and that that length, and with such, I guess, I had seen all of the presentations ahead of time, but being awake for most of those 24 hours, I did get to see a lot of the presentations and was just really impressed with all of the quality of them as well. So it always looked really promising, but actually having gone through the event and seen almost all of the presentations, it just seemed like such a quality event, and wanted to try to support it how we can.
Yeah, thanks. So I am curious because I think that you probably were very close, or maybe even did better than Joel Dolson and myself, one of the other lead organizers who we stayed up. I don't even want to say how few hours we got to sleep. How many sessions did you see last year? How long were you on?
I probably slept for maybe 90-minute chunks. A 90-minute chunk, and then just made sure I had my schedule of when the providers were transitioning, so I just wanted to make sure everything went well when the providers transitioned, and then I had it always on in the background, maybe do some other things, but I'd say probably at least 20 of the sessions.
Well, I applaud you, and I very much appreciate that, because I know a 24-hour event is a whole beast in and of itself.
Well, you guys did such an amazing job with it, organizing it and everything. It was easy to work, to work with everybody, and it went well. So glad to be back again, and really looking forward to this year's lineup. It's exciting.
Yeah, we're excited, and we'll talk a little bit about what's on the schedule at the end, but I want to talk about event accessibility, because we said that's what we were going to do. I do want to just throw out there that if you are on Facebook or on YouTube or one of the other socials and you put some comments in, I believe they should all come to us here. We're coming to you from Restream. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have along the way. Just put a comment in the chat. If you are on Facebook and you want us to see your name and you don't want it to say anonymous, you would need to go to chat.restream.io/FB, and then you can sign in and give it permission to see your name from Facebook. Otherwise, you can post anonymous comments and we might read those too. So for people who are new to virtual event accessibility, there's a lot to think about. And I think one of the things that I see a lot, they don't understand the difference between is automated and live captions. At WordPress Accessibility Day, we do live captions with people from your team who come to our sessions and type out what's being said. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the difference between live or human captions versus automated, and why live captions are worth investing in.
Yeah, absolutely. ASR is a great tool and it's a good supplement.
Do you mind defining ASR?
Oh, sure. Automated speech recognition. And so what we mean by ASR is, those automated transcripts or auto captions. And I think a lot of people who aren't relying on captions find ASR or auto captions really useful. They're a great supplement. They can help you, retain things a little better. And if they're slightly inaccurate, you still can participate in the meeting. The issue with them is when people are trying to rely on them for equal access. And in those settings, they're still not great. There are things we can do as speakers to make the ASR generate better results. We can speak more clearly or in full sentences, but there's really nothing that can replace a human captioner or a human transcriber for real-time events or live events. There's just so many different considerations. Especially if there's multiple speakers, there's different accents, depending on the topic. ASR might not capture certain vocabulary so well. And so having a human captioner is really essential to having equal access for everybody at the event. The industry standard is 98% or better for real-time captions. And if it falls below 96.5% accuracy, that's when it starts becoming unusable. And so even with ASR at the top of its game, it rarely reaches that 96.5 or 97% accuracy mark, which we just need fundamentally to understand written text. And so human providers are great at translating auditory sound into the written word and making it make sense in the written form, and not just capturing every single word, but making it make sense. So that's why it's so important to make sure you have the right accessibility options at your event. Human captioners are great. And if there are going to be people who are deaf who sign, having sign language interpreters is also something that's really beneficial for the accessibility of the event. But live captioners, having a human captioner at your event is a great start.
Yeah, I know. I want to circle back to that signing in just a minute, but I think on the difference with human captioners, I've noticed too, especially at our meetups, which you also do all the transcription for after the event and like correct the captions to make sure that they're really accurate, that there's some stuff where, like Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is abbreviated WCAG. And we have different speakers who call it, I've heard them call it WCAG. I call it WCAG. Some people call it WCAG, right? And an automated thing never gets it right.
Right.
But it's a really important term that's super relevant in a lot of accessibility talks. Almost every speaker might say that term. And that to me is a really great example. And I think whether or not you're giving an accessibility event, any event, you probably have jargon or terms that are really relevant to what your speakers are talking about and for your attendees to understand that an automated tool is just not going to be able to catch and correctly type out.
Yeah. And I think I was watching a YouTube video, and there was a sponsor, and the auto captions got that sponsor's name wrong. And so and so now that's part of the caption file. That's now part of the SEO. That sponsor does not get as many SEO options because it's misspelled in the caption file. And that's how search engines search your video. It's through the caption file. So it's definitely about accessibility, but there's also a kind of a practical component for searchability and navigating that video after the fact, and avoiding embarrassing ASR mistakes, or having jargon or company's name spelled wrong. That's something that humans are gonna be more attuned to. ASR is getting better. If you do give it vocabulary lists, it is getting better at using that vocabulary and identifying it. I think it's important to highlight the value of human captioners, and also talk about where ASR is getting better, because we do need to make sure events are accessible. ASR is a good way theoretically to make that happen. It's just not at the level to make it happen practically. So keeping an eye on it, and seeing where it's improving slowly, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing some interviews recently and interviewed a gentleman who is deaf, and we just used the automated captions in Zoom because he showed up and we learned that he was deaf when he showed up for his meeting, and it worked fine. We paid attention to them. We all had it open. If it said something, if it typed something wrong, we okay, let's rephrase or supplement in the chat, right? To make sure that he was getting the correct information. So I think in things like that, just on the fly, the automated captions are especially helpful. I know that these videos going out to social media right now is getting automated captions. But I do think, if someone is planning an event in advance and they have sponsors for that event, just budget, I think, for having human captions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry. And yeah, for events, definitely, for meetings and things, and making sure everyone's needs are met. ASR can sometimes work, but for event accessibility, it's not gonna cut it.
Yeah. So you talked about sign language, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because that's something that not a lot of events in the WordPress space, most events in the WordPress space have captions, human captions. But I think we're the first to include sign, because we had some feedback from some of our meetup attendees that they wanted sign. And so last year I pushed for us to have sign language interpretation. For people who are less familiar with the deaf community, they might not understand why it's beneficial to have sign in addition to captions. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that you could share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. That's a great question. I think a lot of people wonder, why do we need closed captions and ASL interpretation? Or sometimes someone's deaf and you just assume they need one or the other. And the reality is not all deaf people sign. So sometimes captions are more appropriate. But for those who do, sign language is a visual language. It's not, there is American Sign Language or British Sign Language. There's different variations, but it's a visual language. It's not a one-to-one English sign sort of thing. And so people who sign natively, that's their native language. And English is often, the written English is often a second language, or it's a secondary way of communicating. And so having sign language gives people equal access to the event in the form that's going to be most meaningful for them, and allows them to engage with the content more meaningfully than if they have to attempt to read the captions, which is kind of like reading a second language for many people. And that's why having the sign language is a great thing to provide, just equal access to those who communicate in that medium and that language.
Yeah, because it can be, it's like you said, it's English, written English might be their second language, not their first.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. Mhm.
Do you know the difference between the different types of sign languages?
There's lots of different types. I'm not an expert, but I've come across American Sign Language, British Sign Language, Indian Sign Language. There's also Black American Sign Language, um, and yeah, there's lots of kind of variations. Um, but yeah, I don't know too much about it. Most of the time, we deal with ASL interpretation here in the States. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I want to circle a little bit back to captions and transcripts, which is a whole different
Sure.
thing from captions. You gave a really great presentation at the WordPress accessibility meetup on different types of transcription, which until you gave that presentation, I had no idea about that there was more than one kind. And I think, oh, I might have lost my bit.ly link, but I'll make sure to go put this in the notes and in your sponsor blog post, which is going to go on the WordPress Accessibility Day website. But if anyone wants to go and watch this presentation. So I'm wondering if you want to describe the different types of transcription that there is and pros and cons of different kinds.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to touch on is something that we talked about earlier, but real time versus offline or post production transcription. Um, and so the talk was mostly on post production or offline transcription and the different types in that setting. So when we have a final video file or audio file, and we want that spoken content written out in a document, and so that the words match and that there's speakers and everything. And while that sounds like it's pretty straightforward, this is where there's a few different variations. So a transcript is definitely the written form of the audio, but where it gets interesting is, well, we speak differently often than we would write something. We also speak with things like huh, filler words, and those are not essential to understanding the meaning of what was said. Yeah, and removing them doesn't fundamentally change the meaning. So that's we have to consider how are we making that transcript readable, and this is where we get into, maybe I'll break it into three different types. We have full verbatim, which includes everything that's said. It should have the speaker IDs, all the hus, false starts. Basically, it's a very faithful representation of what was said. And in legal settings, this is definitely, it's necessary. In certain settings, it's really helpful to have all of that detail. But in terms of accessibility, it can often be tiring for the eye to read all of those filler words. It makes it harder to follow if if the paragraphs aren't broken up well, or there's just lots of long run-on sentences. It's hard to comprehend everything. And so there's another type of transcription called a clean verbatim. And what that is, it makes the transcript more readable. So it removes all of those hus. In a certain sense, it's faithful in a different way. It's faithful to the speaker's intention. It doesn't change words. It's not to change anything fundamentally from what they said, but to clean it up for the written format so that the reader can really, digest it. And there's another type of transcript which is used more in real time, but it
In
can be
schools, I think you were saying is
exact.
where that's used a lot.
It's used a lot in high school, undergrad. I mean, all the way up even to doctoral work. People use it. It has a lot of capability. It's called type well, or meaning for meaning transcription, and this is really great in educational settings, or sometimes in meetings with a lot of people. And this is where the essence of what is said is captured. So it's more than note taking, but it's going to be more pared down than even the clean verbatim transcript. It's going to condense and chunk ideas. If something is repeated multiple times by the speaker, which often happens in meetings or in classes, it's only typed out once. So there's a lot of, it's more, in many ways, it's interpreting, it's text interpreting. And so it's another way to engage with the content of the video or the audio. And it might be more useful also for language learners or people who don't speak English as a first language. In classes, it helps them see the ideas more concisely. So there's just lots of benefits to that meaning for meaning type of transcript. And but the most frequent ones you see are clean verbatim and full verbatim, and kind of understanding. Those are the two that you're going to be asking for most of the time when you're doing post production.
Yeah, I did actually find that link. So if anyone wants to go find this presentation, you can go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/WPA11, the numbers, Y dash transcription, and find this talk. I think the thing that I most appreciated about this talk was that we had our normal captioner doing the verbatim caption, and then you brought a captioner to do the meaning for meaning transcription during your talk. And so we had both side by side that we could look at and compare, and it was so neat.
Cool. I'm glad that was helpful.
Yeah. I really like that. I also thought, just in general from I see how from like a readability standpoint, it's much more readable to get what the intent of it was. So
yeah, and
I thought that was neat.
That brings up just a topic, for any event or meeting or whatever. It's really making sure that it's going to be accessible for the people who are there. As you want to try to make things as generally accessible as possible. But understanding these differences in types of transcription, and especially for real-time, offline, meaning for meaning, all of that is just really important in making sure people are accommodated or get the appropriate captioning service that they need for the event. It's more that's more individual accommodations, and making sure event accessibility is it's so challenging. How do you go far? How do you make things as accessible and as possible, and then make sure that everyone else has the ability to ask for it if they need. So that's also why I really appreciate being part of this this event, because you guys do such a great job of that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm assuming that if somebody is running their own event and they're not really sure, what should I ask for? They could just come to you and say, hey, I need help making this more accessible. And you could point them, okay, these are the kind of captions we can do. You have some recommendations, and Empire Caption Solutions can help guide people in making those choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's about understanding the needs of the event. Obviously, budget's always a concern, and if you can budget, accessibility into the event from the beginning, that's preferable. But whatever it is, it's trying to talk with the event organizers and make it more accessible than it would be. That's always, how can we make it more accessible?
So I'd love along those lines to maybe pick your brain a little bit about how speakers can speak more accessibly or give talks in a way that make it easier for captioners or signers. Are there certain things that speakers can do to make their talk more easy to caption or interpret?
Yes and no. I mean, yes. Captioners are great. That's one of the things that makes them so wonderful, is their versatility and their ability to adapt to almost any different type of speaker or different setting. So they're going to do an amazing job, no matter what. But where it often becomes challenging or tiring is when one person speaks over the other, when there's multiple people talking at the same time, and it's not clear what the main point is. Just humans or computer, you only can really process a few things at a time. And humans are really great at sorting through maybe 3 or 4 voices and picking out the dominant one, or understanding context and picking which one makes most sense for the transcript. But if speakers can try to take turns, especially in multiple, in meeting settings or discussion settings, speaking one at a time is really important, really helpful.
We started, so the other podcast that I'm a co-host on is called WP Product Talk, and we'll have 2 hosts and a guest. And we were noticing that we would sometimes, like, both the hosts would want to respond to what the guest said. So now we started in our private chat, we just put an X, and the first person who put the X gets to go first, and the next person has to wait their turn, right? So like coming up with little things like that to make sure you're not talking over one another.
Exactly. Other than that, I think trying to speak clearly. I find myself, I get very excited and, sometimes nervous, and I, tend to talk a little fast. And so these are just good tips in general for your talks, but to breathe, take your time, try to speak clearly, don't rush. All of that, I think, helps everybody. It's not just the captioner. I think it helps everyone who is participating to better take in the content. So it's good for everyone.
Yeah, I've noticed if we have speakers that you can sort of tell the speakers who've pre-written a script and they read, and when people read, it seems like they read so much faster than they would speak if they were trying to decide in their head what to say next.
Yeah, as a type-well transcriber in a lot of educational settings, where we're taught, if someone is reading, we need to get that ahead of time to pass, because we typically speak around 150 words a minute, 175, and if we're reading, we tend to go over 200 words per minute.
Oh, wow.
And trained verbatim captioners can top out around 250 words per minute. So it's, they're able to capture very fast speech, but when someone's speaking that for a long, long time, it does tend to drain. So when people are reading, definitely take your time, remind yourself that your brain is, still staying engaged with it, and don't rush.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about audio description, which I know is a service that Empire Caption Solutions provides. What is audio description?
Yeah, what is audio description? It's a good question. It started out as a service in the theater about 30, 40 years ago, and it described the visual contents on stage so that someone who is blind or has low vision can participate in the play or the show, whatever is going on. And it describes who the characters are, what they look like before the show. It sets everything up so that when the play is going on, the person who's receiving audio description has context for what's happening on stage. And so that's how it got started. And as video became more digital and broadcast, and now we're all online, making sure that video is accessible with audio description has become increasingly important, especially for entertainment. So you'll notice Netflix always has their series with audio description. Most Peacock, most of the new major streaming platforms now include audio description with their new productions, which is amazing.
Yeah, I noticed actually PBS Kids, all of their shows have audio description too, because my 6-year-old had, I don't know how, probably by accident, but she'd turned on audio description on Sesame Street on her iPad in the PBS Kids app, and she was watching audio described Sesame Street, which so So it literally described, Elmo fell down
Yeah.
or something like that. So if you can't see, you knew what the sound was or why Elmo might be crying, right? Because otherwise you'd be like, why is Elmo crying? All of a sudden, I have no idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so especially for entertainment, it's really great. Also for documentaries, it allows those documentaries, if you're to be heard more as audio podcasts in many ways. So, which is really cool. I clean my house and I'm watching some Netflix documentary, and I don't have to stay glued to the screen because I'm hearing all of the important information. So I think, it's not just about, making it accessible for people who are blind or have low vision. It's a cool feature, I think, for everybody. And in certain places it extends the experience for others. And there's been a lot of work done in the entertainment field, but in terms of educational videos or making online video content accessible with audio description, that's been something that's newer and a bigger challenge, and there aren't as many standards. With the entertainment, all of it is what we call standard audio description, which means that the narrations fit in the natural pauses of the video. So when there's a silence or no dialogue, that's where the description typically goes. And it's a whole art how you describe that. It's unlike captioning in that it's not a one-to-one, and it's
You have to choose what's important to point out,
exactly.
basically.
Yeah, and it's ideal if you work with someone who uses the service, someone who is going to be able to QA, depending on the size of the project. So for definitely anything that's entertainment based, you want someone who is a consumer of audio description to be a part of that process. A lot of the work that we do at Empire is individual accommodations. And so we work directly with the person who's going to be using the audio description. So it's more in educational settings. And there's less standards in the with educational videos and online video. And part of that is because so much video has no pauses. There's only constant dialogue, and so for that to be made accessible, what happens is we create a separate version of the video, and it's an extended version. And so what we do is we find the places where there's important visual content, we pause, extend the frame, insert the narration, and then continue the video. And so this is something that there's not much technical standards for how to do it. The media players out there all support audio description in a different way. YouTube supports it very well. They actually allow for a separate video. Some require a different audio track. Some do it programmatically. So there's really also no standards for the final output for online video and audio description. So it's still very much the wild, wild west in terms of the technical standards and the workflow and the process. And actually, I've been working with the two people at Get Braille. I believe they're talking, Tanya and Mark. They also,
Yeah, they'll be speaking.
we've been chatting for a few months now, and Tanya is just super technical minded, and she's really gifted. And they also do audio description, and it's been really great working with them. We've been working on some just technical tools to help the workflow and streamline the process a little more, because that's where we see there being kind of the biggest gap right now. It's helping people understand how to make it. There's plenty of people who are really gifted at script writing or narrating. And outside of those entertainment settings where there tend to be some budget, for creating things for home video, it can be very cost prohibitive, or in educational settings, it can be cost prohibitive. And so we've been trying to figure out ways together to get that cost down and kind of increase how people can create these and make that a lot easier.
That's really neat. Yeah, I think audio description, I think that's something maybe that a lot of people, whether they're agency owners or WordPress developers or freelancers or content creators, maybe aren't aware of or haven't thought about. But I do think I see a lot of times videos in the WordPress space that I know would benefit from audio description. And honestly, we had a talk last year and the speaker was phenomenal, but my feedback, we allow anyone to give feedback to speakers and we send it anonymously. But for that speaker was, they showed how to do something and they had like pre-recorded some stuff on their screen. And there were segments of their video where they weren't talking at all. And they were just showing how something happened, but they weren't literally saying, and it was on YouTube. And I think it was like how to do captions. They weren't saying like, okay, now you click this button and then you click this button and then you click this button. And I've seen this too for like product demos where on a WordPress product website, the company might have a demo of their product and it just plays music and it shows a mouse clicking around on the screen. And that video is essentially pointless for someone who's blind.
Yeah. I think you brought up a great point, and I think this is also where, if we're more thoughtful about how we're producing our content, then audio description isn't needed as a secondary service as much. If you are making a demo, like you said, if you're making a demo, describe what you're doing and incorporate that into the content. Make it sexy, make it awesome, make it with your branding, however, but it needs to be there. And if you slap it on after, it's it might make it more accessible, but it's gonna not make it as elegant, and so it's important, to have that aspect, of it as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've started pointing out to meetup speakers, and I think we're providing information for speakers of WordPress Accessibility Day this year, is that if you have important information on your slides, you should describe it or read it, because sometimes people say different words from what are on their slides and they're just assuming people are reading the slides.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you have, as somebody who's done some audio description, do you have any tips for speakers about how they can, better self-describe or decide whether something on a slide is decorative or meaningful, or any thoughts on that just as they're giving their presentation?
Sure. Yeah, I think if you do have slides, it's important to go through ahead of time, like you said, and kind of note or make sure that you're saying everything on there, and don't assume that people are going to have that information just because it's on your slide. Some people turn the slide, they wait 10 seconds for some, people to read, or there's filler language, and then they go about assuming everyone has read that information. So just not making that assumption, whether that means go point by point, however it's going to work into your presentation, make that happen. But make it happen, plan that ahead of time. If you're going to be using those visual prompts, if there are pictures, make sure you have a meaningful description of them ahead of time, so you're not fumbling to describe what's on the page or what's on the image. Make sure also, I think it's important, make sure that the graphics you use are meaningful. So if you have something that is there, it's not just because, and if it's there, then describe it. So I think it with audio description in meetings and educational settings and things, I think there's a lot that people can do ahead of time, to prepare so that you don't have to do as much after. And it's figuring out kind of where are those gaps where it doesn't happen, or, you need a little more assistance to make it accessible. But yeah, I do. It's hard to sell audio description sometimes, because when you're telling people about the service and you're telling, hey, if you just do your content differently, you're not going to need the service I'm selling. There's tons and tons of settings where it still is necessary, and it'd be great to like go back and update content and things like that. But yeah, I think we're going to be figuring out a lot more over the next few years, how to standardize these things so that, meetings are more accessible from the beginning, but then also how can we take post-event video or, any sort of learning educational videos and make those more accessible, more streamlined and quicker and cheaper and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, I know. We often talk about if we do our job right, then we will work ourselves out of a job because every presenter and every developer will know all about accessibility and they'll just do it by default. And then those of us who audit things or fix things will not be needed anymore. But that might not be such a bad problem to have for the world.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot, with ChatGPT and all of that fun stuff, and I just see so many opportunities to expand accessibility in a lot of different areas. And I would love it if we're never going to be out of a job. I don't think we're ever going to. There's always going to be ways of optimizing things. New things are going to emerge. New challenges. And I think that's what's so cool about being in the accessibility space, because once we solve all of the problems we have now, we're going to be so great at solving the problems that are going to be existing then. So, but
yeah. Well, this has been really fun chatting with you, and I really appreciate all of the advice. I know that I'm going to be telling all our speakers they have to come watch the video so they can get more tips about being better speakers. Before we sign off, of course, we want to remind everyone that WordPress Accessibility Day is coming up soon. It's going to start at 14:45 UTC, which for those of us in America, that's 9:45 a.m. Chicago Central Time. And that will be opening remarks. And then we will have the presentations starting at 10 a.m. Central or 1500 UTC. And we're going to have keynote is a conversation with Jennison Atchison from the Global Accessibility Awareness Day Foundation. Dan, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the schedule yet, if there's any talks that you're looking forward to.
Yes, well, I'm a little biased, but my friends Tanya and Mark, I'm really looking forward to their presentation on immersive audio description. They are such creative people and just really great at what they do, and they've started telling me about immersive audio description, and every time I hear them speak, they just kind of blow my mind. So I'm really excited about that one. And then also...
hold on one sec. So that one's at 0 UTC, which is 7 p.m. Central in the US.
Yes. And then there was another one I saw that looked really interesting for me, was the automation of testing. It was testing automation. I think it's around midnight or sometime in the wee hours. But that one... It's a practical guide to automated accessibility. It's 7 a.m. New York time on the 28th. So I guess the second day.
Oh, I muted myself. And that is Mark Stedman from Fidelity Investments. I follow him on Twitter, and he always has interesting things to say. So I was really excited to see that one as well. And the other thought that I thought was a good pro for that was Alex Stein, who's on our organizing team, and he uses a screen reader every day. He actually said that his company uses Fidelity as one of their ways that they give out benefits to employees, I guess. I don't know much about Fidelity. But he said that their mobile app, he uses it all the time, and it works really well with the screen reader. So that bodes well for that talk being a very good, informative one. So, yeah.
Great.
But, well, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. Again, if anyone wants to learn more about Empire Caption Solutions, they can go to empirecaptions.com, or find more information on the WordPress Accessibility Day website. And of course, please go register. It is a free event, and you can register at 2023.wpaccessibility.day. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the WordPress Accessibility Day.